everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Maureen Callahan, author of Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. Maureen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Brittany.
Your book is just an incredible, interesting, page-turning read, and it's all about the Kennedy family tree and the women in their orbit. So first, what made you decide to tell these women's stories?
I knew I was going to write a book sort of reconsidering and recontextualizing the Kennedy legacy and the Camelot myth for a long time. But it wasn't until when Harvey Weinstein was convicted of rape, that was a watershed moment. And this book really came into focus in this sort of post-Me Too era of all of these women, some extremely famous, like Jackie Kennedy Onassis, like Marilyn Monroe, some whose names you may not know, but all of whom share this really tragic bond, which is the ways in which they were used, abused, and discarded, not just by the Kennedys, but by a Kennedy-worshiping media that to this day seeks to protect this myth they know is false. And I think what makes the book super relevant for right now is we're seeing the consequences of a media that is bound up in protecting a president and the catastrophic fallout.
I want to first talk about, to your point, one of the women who had, I don't know if you could even call it an affair with JFK. It took her, in your book, she was saying it took years and decades to describe even what transpired. Was that assault? Was that consensual? Was that something more? And I am curious, why do you think the media and Americans have idolized this family for decades and for generations?
I know exactly who you're talking about. It's Mimi Alford, who started at the White House in JFK's secretarial pool. She was a 19-year-old virgin. And on her first day, she's invited up to the White House residence where she has gotten drunk. The president suddenly materializes, ushers her into a bedroom, his wife's bed, his wife is away, takes her virginity in less than 3 minutes. And as she wrote years later, short of screaming, I could not have gotten him off of me. And she's not sure even now, right? 3 days later, an unthinkable, I consider this an assault. JFK invites her to a swim in the White House pool. She goes. His aide, Dave Powers, is sitting on the edge of the pool with his feet dangling in the water. And President Kennedy says to 19-year-old Mimi, Dave looks a little tense. Why don't you go over and relax him? And she knows what this means, and she feels she must. And so she orally services this aide while JFK silently watches. To the second part of your question, why the media continues to protect the Kennedys, I really have no idea. I know there's a feeling amongst many that JFK, gave the ultimate sacrifice, that this family has suffered enough. This is always sort of the go-to. Hasn't this family suffered enough? When Mimi came out with her memoir, she was pilloried by female stars in the media, by Barbara Walters, who said, why are you doing this? She said to her, you could have let this go. Can you imagine?
I cannot imagine. And another interesting fact from Mimi's story was when she was going for one of those White House swims, she noticed that there were a lot of bathing suits hanging up and there weren't women in JFK's cabinet. So that's what she was thinking. And the book does just an amazing job of going generation, woman to woman, from Rose Kennedy down to Carolyn Bessette. And do you think that this was a generational problem within Kennedy men? I mean, what is the root of the problem, and do you think it can ever be eradicated?
it's definitely a generational problem. It feels both congenital and cultural among Kennedy men. Um, I mean, to this day, women who marry into the family are basically told, like, you're not a real Kennedy. You're not a blood Kennedy. So you can come and go and they'll just be fine. And when they tire of you, they're going to discard of you in a way that is so painful and humiliating. And, you know, to this point, one of the women that I write about, who is a more recent victim, Mary Richardson Kennedy, second wife to RFK Jr., our current third party spoiler, who remains unbothered by questions about how he treated his wife, who told her, quote, "You'd be better off dead." I mean, it feels as though until this country has a real reckoning with who these people are and what they do to women, we're never going to be fully healed of this. We're never going to be free of it.
What do you think the Kennedy men and the Kennedy family as a whole think of women? Because, like you said, the people who are on the further outer layers, according to your book, get treated worse. And who I'm thinking that's coming to mind is Pamela Kelly, who in the book you note that Joseph Kennedy II driving a car spun out of control, flipped over, and then she ended up paralyzed. So can you tell us a little bit about her story, and in general, what do you think the Kennedys think about women?
Yeah, I mean, Pam's story is incredibly heartbreaking, and I actually just saw her sister a couple of weeks ago, and brought her the book. Pam died in 2020 during COVID in a nursing home alone. She was paralyzed at age 18 by Joe Kennedy, who was recklessly driving a Jeep packed with teenagers through the roads of Nantucket. It flipped. Pam was paralyzed from the waist down for life. She was so incredibly destroyed by this that not long after the accident, she took a lit cigarette and burned the letters DIE into her own stomach. Die. The Kennedys convinced her not to sue, that they would always take care of her. She had to fight tooth and nail her whole life to get money out of Joe. In terms of media complicity, when the New York Times reported upon this, they called this accident Joe's, quote, mishap. They said that 2 girl passengers were injured. They did not mention Pam by name until the last paragraph. When he shows up in court, the judge, a Kennedy family friend, says, "I don't think jail's going to do anything for you." Gives him a $100 fine and tells him to go on his way and do something good with his name. This is a systemic problem in American culture, in the legal system, in our media, with this family. I think this family devalues women to a degree that is jaw-dropping. And my sort of favorite example of this is the late Ted Kennedy, who female voters were told forever, Democratic Party loyalists especially, he may be problematic in his personal life, but he's great at legislating for you. This is a guy who left a young campaign aide to die, suffocating to death over hours in 3 feet of water. Problematic, but great at legislating for women. Like, we're supposed to accept that.
And I mean, there is another Kennedy right now, as you mentioned, running for president, the third party candidate. Why do you think it is important to share the story of Mary Richardson Kennedy, especially right now?
Because female voters especially, I mean all voters, but women especially, should know exactly the kind of guy they're voting for and exactly what he thinks of women, which is nothing. Nothing. Now, not only did Mary's discovery of Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s sex diaries destroy her, he kept diaries of the multitude of women that he had had sexual encounters with.
And you saw these diaries, right?
I saw these diaries. I read the names. Some of them are very famous women. Some of them were friends of Mary's. Sometimes there were 2 or 3 women in a day or in a single encounter. They were ranked. 1 to 10, not by performance. She knew that. She knew it was about how far they had gone. She gave these diaries to her lawyer, her divorce lawyer, with the implication, if anything happens to me, I want the world to know the kind of monster I was married to. After she committed suicide, Bobby Jr. fought Mary's siblings tooth and nail for her remains, and he won, and he buried her with a lot of fanfare, with media present, in the Kennedy family plot up in Massachusetts. Now, 1 week later, without the proper permits, without telling anybody, in the middle of the night, he secretly had her coffin dug up and moved to the other side of the graveyard, buried alone, facing traffic. He is a monster.
I mean, just reading that passage particularly, I mean, is jaw dropping. Did he respond to your book, to these allegations?
No, he has yet to respond. The book has been out for about a week now, and he has said nothing.
To a Vanity Fair article that didn't shine him in a good light either, he responded to this. He reportedly said, "I am not a church boy," and quote, "I had a very, very rambunctious youth. I said in my announcement speech that I have so many skeletons in my closet that if they could all vote, I could run for king of the world." What do you make of his reaction there?
I hear a lot of eyes, me. I hear I could be king of the world. I hear malignant narcissism. I hear not a word of regret, remorse. This is a guy who drags his dead, estranged wife's name through the mud. He recently claimed that he had no dealings with Jeffrey Epstein. Don't blame him for that association. Blame Mary, the devout Catholic. She was the one who was friends with Ghislaine Maxwell and brought him into that sordid little circle. Total lie. Total lie.
He did pick a woman to be his running mate, and from what it seems, based on media, it seems that he's in a good relationship with his now wife, Cheryl Hines. What do you make of that?
I think the picking of the female VP candidate is pandering, and it's meant to sort of paper over his terrible history with women. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is not just culpable in what happened to his wife, Mary. He was also the prime agitator in vacating his cousin Michael Skakel's conviction for the savage sexual assault and murder of a 15-year-old girl in Connecticut in the 70s. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., tell me a Republican who could get away with this, has been claiming for years that two teenagers, one black and one mixed race, decided that night they were going to go down to the wealthiest neighborhood in Connecticut, find this blonde girl, and go, quote, caveman on her. That's who Bobby Kennedy Jr. is.
You mentioned an interesting phrase, the Kennedy playbook, and that seems to be a trend in your book, from Joe Kennedy to the way he treats Rose and Rosemary on down. Talk about that. What do you think the Kennedy playbook is?
Well, I could have done like a little, I think like a pamphlet that could have gone with the book that would have been like, here's the Kennedy playbook if you are an inconvenient woman. And I have dedicated this book to inconvenient women everywhere, because I think every woman knows what it's like to be made to feel inconvenient. Oh, you maybe have too much of an opinion or too much of a mouth. The Kennedy family playbook is, if you pose a threat to them. You mentioned Joe, the patriarch, and his beautiful daughter, Rosemary, who he secretly forcibly lobotomized when she was in her early 20s, leaving her with the physical and mental capacities of a 2-year-old, and then hid her away for the rest of her life. A lonely, lonely life. In the book, I report what the media never has, because they don't look for it, which is that family friends of the Kennedys suspected strongly that Joe had been molesting his own daughter, and that she was acting out, and she was about to reveal this terrible secret, and he had to shut her up. She's a very extreme example of what the Kennedy playbook typically outlines, which is you call a woman crazy, you try to forcibly institutionalize her Even Jackie, as a young wife to Jack Kennedy, was packed off to a mental hospital and given electroshock treatments, 3 in 1 week, because she was upset he was cheating. So she was the problem. She had to be electroshocked into just compliance with this. And then if that doesn't work, you shred their reputation in the public square, right? If you accuse them of rape, long history of that, they're going to call on their enablers in the media, say that you've got a problem. You as a woman, what are you doing out so late? Why are you dressed that way? Are you a single mom? Why aren't you married? Why are you divorced? Do you have any drug history? Blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, your life is ruined. So I think it's important to have a full reckoning with the damage and the carnage they have caused. I don't think someone like a Carolyn Bessette marries into that family if she knew the whole truth. And this book is the truth.
And a central figure in this book is Jackie Kennedy Onassis. As history looks at her right now, she is a very favorable first lady. She's a fashion icon. She's a political icon in America. You also paint her too as a very complex, a shrewd businesswoman, if you will, because she was thinking multiple times about divorcing JFK, according to your book. And then you point out that Joe Kennedy did pay her $1 million to not divorce her husband, according to your reporting. And she also was shrewd when it came to her marriage with Aristotle Onassis, reportedly getting millions of dollars. So what do you make of Jackie Kennedy and the way the public views her?
Jackie, I think you're exactly right. She's really the central figure of the book, and readers or listeners will meet 3 different Jackies. And I write about these women in a very novelistic way, right? You're in their heads and you're going through these extraordinary life events with them. Jackie number 1 as the model first lady who holds the country together after her husband's brains are blown out all over her lap. Just extraordinary TikTok of what those days and hours were like in the aftermath. The second Jackie you meet is a liberated Jackie who marries a Greek shipping magnate, Ari Onassis, 5 years after the assassination, is tarred and feathered by the global media as a whore who sold herself to the highest bidder. That would never happen today, not in a post-Me Too world. The third Jackie we meet is the unlikeliest Jackie and my personal favorite. And this is a Jackie who is an empty nester, a single woman, and she is looking at the rest of her life. And instead of joining museum boards and going to fundraisers, she decides to go back to work. And she decides to go into book publishing and work as an editor because she has a lifelong love of books. She wanted to be a journalist before she married. And when I was researching the book, I found this image I had never seen before, and I put it in there because I think it's so remarkable. Jackie Kennedy Onassis on the cover of Ms. Magazine as the face of the American working woman in 1979. I just love that Jackie.
That was my favorite Jackie too, reading the book. And do you think that these women's stories need to be more central when you're thinking about the Kennedy legacy, the Kennedy political dynasty that we all know today?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the women I get asked most about is Marilyn Monroe, like the fascination endures. And a lot of people don't know that not only was she sexually involved with President Kennedy, but at the very same time, she was sexually involved with his brother Bobby, who was then the United States Attorney General. And they destroyed her. They ground her down until she felt like she was nothing. And there's always been speculation about their involvement in her suicide, and I go into detail about that. But I think the key takeaway is the media has spent decades covering up just how dastardly they were, their abuse of women. I think so. For JFK, for example, I think we need to reconsider his presidency. You have a man who is essentially raping at least one teenage intern in the White House. Like, we really, really need to re-examine what we think of that president.
There were so many stories in here, honestly, too many to count, that were horrifying. Everything from Chappaquiddick and Mary Jo Kopechne to the story of Jackie Kennedy giving birth to her stillborn daughter and Jack Kennedy not coming home and staying on vacation in the Mediterranean. And so many in between, so many that I've never even heard of. Out of all of these stories, all of these details, what horrified you the most?
Oh my God, it's so hard to say. It's so hard to say. You can take a giant, I mean, I think what Joe Kennedy did to his daughter Rosemary is worse than murder. He left her unable to even use the bathroom on her own. She could not speak. She couldn't do a thing for herself. And she was kept all the way across the country, hidden away. He disgustingly told the media that his daughter Rosemary elected to live a quiet life and teach children who were mentally, cognitively delayed. Okay,
And
that
he
is an
and
abomination.
your book showed that he didn't even tell his wife until after it was done, and the kids thought Rosemary went missing. They didn't know what happened.
Yeah, it was a huge trauma in their lives. And even the boys, Ted Kennedy, this was his great childhood trauma. He thought if he didn't behave, if he didn't do well, and most importantly, if he didn't lose weight, because this was something the Kennedys could not abide, do not gain a pound, that he would be made to disappear. And this fear is like a generational fear that has been passed down throughout, the years. And I think you can look at that and say, well, that's the most horrible. But then when you sort of pull each life apart, like you mentioned Jackie with the stillbirth, Jackie wanted more than anything to be a mother. She had had 2 miscarriages. She couldn't hold a pregnancy because her husband kept giving her STDs. But the Kennedys blamed her for being faulty as a woman. She gives birth to this daughter. She's knocked out. She wakes up and she's told her baby was a stillbirth. Her husband is off partying on the Mediterranean on a yacht with a bunch of other women. He is informed of this, and he says to his brother Bobby, "The baby is lost. There's nothing to be done. I'm not coming home." Jackie was in a hospital bed for 8 days after that. She was too depressed and weak to even bury her baby. And her husband comes home on day 10, maybe, because he has been advised by a fellow senator, if you ever want to be president of the United States, you better haul your ass back to your wife. The media knew all about this, but they covered for him. They knew what kind of a guy he was. They thought he was cool.
Why do you think they covered for him? Just because he was cool, young, good looking? Why do you think they ran such cover for him? Because even Jackie knew that the media was covering for him.
Yeah, she did. And I think it was that, there were a lot of guys in that press pool who were deeply enamored of the Kennedys and their image, their aborning as American royalty, who agreed with his politics. And, in what I always have found one of the greatest examples of journalistic malpractice, Ben Bradley, who went on to become, editor-in-chief of the Washington Post, considered himself JFK's best friend. Can't have that. You can't be a member of the press and want to be friends with the people you're covering and want to be absorbed into power rather than always prosecuting power and being suspicious of power and, holding it to account. So I think there's that. And, Jackie, after that stillbirth, after Jack's complete abdication of his role as her husband, left him. She was about to divorce him. She was distraught greatly. She still loved him. And she went and had a conversation with a media mogul at the time to see how this would play out in the media if she left him. And this man informed her that if she left him, first of all, why would she do that? She knew who she married. Not true. Number 2, if she left him, he would never be able to run for president of the United States, and she would deprive America of a potentially great leader. And did she really want that on her conscience? And Jackie was so young and so off kilter. She had nobody else in her life who was saying to her, no, 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 this isn't something you would be doing to Jack. This is something Jack is doing to Jack.
And something that I found in your book, a trend with all the women, is that it felt like they came into the Kennedy orbit when they were extremely impressionable.
Yes. And also many of them at the height of their powers, right? These women all brought something extremely compelling and valuable to the table. They were all beautiful. They were all well-bred, well-educated, stylish. They were almost all of them ready for the cameras. Joan, Ted's wife, would be an exception. Carolyn Bessette would be an exception. But they all had their superpowers. And once they marry into that family, it's like the men try to strip them of all their power. I don't know whether it's out of envy or whether it's out of a need to control. It's probably both, many other things. But it becomes probably the most perilous place for a woman besides like an empty parking lot after midnight. You know what I mean? Like, marrying into the Kennedy family is a very dangerous proposition.
Every sentence in this book, and I listened to the book, I also read the book, there's an explosive detail that I thought I was well versed in history, that I found and learned for the first time. Have any of the Kennedys gotten back to you, responded to this book at all?
No, I've not heard anything. And I actually think it is probably, and I say this with all humility, younger Kennedy women, I hope, read this book. I think it's got to be extremely difficult to be a woman in that family, whether you're a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother. Like, I just think it is, you should get hazard pay. I think I write that, like, I consider Joe Kennedy's $1 million payoff to Jackie not to leave after that first catastrophe with her stillborn daughter. I consider that hazard pay. She earned every penny.
Can you talk about the fact-checking process here? Because I'm sure it must have been vigorous, because the claims in here, like I said, the only word that comes to mind is explosive.
Right. I keep hearing that. It's so funny because, like, I was in it, but like, it is true. Like, every page there's another bombshell, and if it were fiction, you would think this is overwrought. This would never happen to one person, let alone 13 women. And those are not the only women, by the way. But the process was, yes, I hired a fact checker. I paid for that myself. We went through the book over a period of months with a fine-toothed comb. I also hired a researcher who was extraordinary. And I then had a very fine legal mind on this book as well, who came to me through my publisher. We legally vetted this book 8 Ways to Sunday. I mean, we were doing it just extraordinary, like, granular detail. And so that it chafes me a bit when I see reviews like in the New York Times or in the Washington Post that claim that, like, I have no sourcing or it sounds outlandish. It does sound outlandish, but it doesn't mean it's not true. And I hate those attempts to discredit that book because they feel partisan and petty. And if you go to the back, I sort of do this, like, it's almost like, I consider it like a light dessert at the end of a meal where you kind of want a little more. And it's all there. Like, some of it came to me firsthand through my own original reporting. Some of it was written about in memoirs or by other reporters. So, yes, that's a long way of saying it was a very thorough process.
And so you stand by every single claim of this book, obviously.
Yeah, of course I do.
And news came out yesterday. Jack Schlossberg, JFK's grandson, he's blown up on social media in recent weeks. He has been hired at Vogue, and this is what Vogue said about him. Schlossberg's new role as a political correspondent for Vogue will see him combine his background in law and business with the self-described silly goose tendencies he displays online. What do you make of that hiring?
It's peak Nepo baby. This is a guy, tell me what he does. He's like 30 years old. I don't think he's ever held an actual job. He's got all of this access to wealth and power. And what does he do with himself? He spends all day long on Instagram taking videos of himself, like singing in a drugstore. It's like, so he gets a plum position at Vogue, which like you might think is like, oh, that's harmless. But no, like he actually bumped somebody who's like way more educated, skilled, hungry for the opportunity. So, in sum and substance, Vogue will hire Nepo baby Jack Schlossberg, but they will never cover this book.
They haven't covered this book as of yet, right? And you don't think they will
Nope.
at all?
Nope. I don't think they will at all. Ada Wintour is very good friends with Caroline Kennedy. She'll never touch it. I've been told of major media outlets, never going to touch it. They don't want to disturb the Kennedy myth, or they don't want to upset like famous Kennedys that they're kind of in bed with.
So, do you think that this Kennedy dynasty is still alive today and as active as it was back in the 60s, 70s, 80s?
It's not what it was in the 60s, and it won't ever be again. But the Kennedy family still remains a power center in American life and politics. And the attempted blackballing of this book, which I think is important, it's not just a reconsideration of American history, it's also a reflection of women circa now. And I think attempts to blackball it, which they blackball anything they don't like that runs counter to their garbage narrative. I think that's dangerous, and I think it's poisonous. And I think when you see someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gain so much traction, which, let's face it, is largely due to the nostalgia of the Kennedy myth and the fondness the American people still hold. It's a false fondness. It's not based in reality. That tells you everything about why this book matters, I think.
Speaking of the book, Maureen, where can people find it?
Well, we finally restocked on Amazon. It sold out before it was formally on sale. The pre-orders were like through the roof, which was just astonishing, and I'm so thankful. So we're now back on Amazon. Barnes & Noble also placed another order. We're at Sam's Club, and of course, support your local independent bookstores.
Maureen Callahan, thank you so much. I hope to have more conversations with you in the future.
I would love it. Thank you so much for having me on. What a great interview. Thank you.